So today I'm going to talk about how Hitler basically transformed a democracy into a dictatorship in a very, very short amount of time. So how do I say this without sounding like Nazi? You have to admire how fast he did this. He turned a democracy that was um 15 years old, a 15-year-old democracy, a bit less. 15-year-old democracy into a full dictatorship in just a year and a half. It's it's really impressive, and the way he did this, it's just crazy. I it's kind of scary how someone could just destroy democracies like so effectively. And then that regime lasted for 12 years. So it's not like it was a weak regime that got overthrown soon after. No. It was there for a while. So you have to regardless of, hopefully you don't support them, or you do, you have to admire how effective politicians and manipulators they were. It's actually really impressive. So, so at the beginning, 30th of January 1933, when Hitler becomes Chancellor, he enters the political scene of a democracy. He is in a full democracy, with the Reichstag, the president, he himself as Chancellor. Good. By the 2nd of August of 1934, it's a full-on dictatorship. Hitler is named Führer of Germany, of the German Reich. So in just a year and a bit, a Reichstag fire happened with following that an emergency decree, which basically ended up removing individual civil liberties and communists. Then an enabling act was passed, which removed the Reichstag. A legal revolution happened, which removed political parties, trade unions, church, civil service, local governments. The Night of Long Knives, which removed internal party rivals, and Hindenburg's death, which removed the president. So all those things happened, and they were handing Hitler on a silver platter his dictatorship. So I'm going to go chronologically. Well, mind you, the legal revolution, it goes throughout 1933 and about 34, so I may be a bit wishy-washy there. Like, it's not that I'm wishy-washy, it's the dates. Sometimes one of them is before the Enabling Act, then one of them is maybe after the Night of the Long Knives, or so it's just a bit of, I don't know, but the rest is going. The rest is chronologically. So first, the Reichstag fire. When was the Reichstag fire? It was on the 27th of February 1933. This guy, van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, got blamed. He was seen near the Reichstag fire, seemingly having set the Reichstag on fire, which led to the whole thing led to an emergency decree. Now, the Reichstag fire, back then, they put all the blame on the Communist Party, on the KPD. Nowadays, there's more evidence as to the Nazis were the ones to blame. However, evidence points to Hitler not knowing of the Reichstag fire, Goering being the one who orchestrated it, and basically Goering was the guy who had most access to the Reichstag, with him being the president of the Reichstag. So I don't know, he was the one who orchestrated it. But Hitler's reaction when he came into the Reichstag, when he came to the area, and so the Reichstag was on fire, and everything and what he did after it does suggest that he took this as an opportunity. I mean, he got there and said, "Oh wow, it was the communists," but it's not like he got there and went, "Oh hey, that's the communists." He was genuinely upset, or I don't know. His reaction was believable. I do believe Hitler did not know about the Reichstag fire. It was all the Nazi officials, but it was the Nazi van der Lubbe who just got. It's Marius van der Lubbe. He got a friend. He had some sort of mental problem, and he should have been taken care of by giving him help. But yeah, he got the death penalty and died. Well, the Reichstag fire, Hitler used this to pass the emergency decree. The emergency decree was passed on the 28th of February 1933, literally the day after the Reichstag fire. So, in order to put a bit of context before I tell you what the actual emergency decree was, so now with the coronavirus, the governments have a state of emergency. So in Spain, I live here, I know it better, but we're in an estado de alarma, a state of alarm, which means the government can control the people a bit more in order to prevent the spread of chaos. So that's essentially what Hitler did. He passed the emergency decree, which took away the freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom to organize and assemble, freedom of privacy, you can postal, telegraphic, telephonic communications, they were all monitored, and there were warrants for house arrest, orders for confessions, and restrictions on property beyond legal limits. So he used all of this with the excuse that it was for the protection of the German people. There was an act of terrorism, and he needed to control the people in order to handle it. This was approved. It did only remove individual rights and liberties, not political ones, but individual ones. So you can print newspapers, blah, blah. But it didn't affect the Reichstag as much, so yeah. That one I understand passing through. He basically also manipulated Hindenburg into passing this through Article 48. It wasn't Hitler that, there's a common misconception that Hitler was the one who used Article 48. No, it was Hitler who manipulated Hindenburg into using Article 48. That's the emergency decree. Then the Enabling Act was passed on the 23rd of March 1933. What was the Enabling Act? It was a law that gave Hitler the power to pass laws without consulting the Reichstag or the president, and also dissolve the Reichstag for 4 years. Now, when my teacher told me about this, I was mind blown. Okay, you have the Reichstag. This was passed by 444 votes for and 94 votes against. Mainly those 94 votes from the SPD. Because, also, notice how it doesn't add up to a total number of seats in the Reichstag, the votes. Well, it's because the KPD had been banned before this. But, okay, so Hitler says, okay, I'm going to put this Enabling Act that allows you to pass laws without consulting you or the president and basically taking control. And you vote for him. Fine, you can do this, then after 4 years, we will assemble again. How will they assemble if the freedom of press has been removed, freedom of expression has been removed, and the Reichstag has been dissolved and can't put themselves up again? They basically killed the democracy there. Not entirely, it was only removing. It removed the parliamentary body, so political rights were removed. But still, they basically killed democracy right there. Because now he had free access to the legal revolution. Because he could do this completely through legal means, which would not have happened if the Reichstag was still in place. Which, it was the objective. And those 94 people who actually voted against this, one, props to them for standing up to Hitler. Two, those probably all got killed in the Night of the Long Knives. So, yay for them, but it did not last long. A bit more than a year. That was the Enabling Act. People always confuse the Emergency Decree and the Enabling Act. So in order for you to know, the Enabling Act removed parliamentary rights, political rights, a parliamentary body. Emergency Decree removed individual rights. So, for example, the Emergency Decree removed some of my rights, my own rights. The Enabling Act would remove the Parliament's rights, like the Congress, those rights, political rights. So that was Enabling Act. Now, onto the interesting part, which is the legal revolution. I'm not that into political theory, and when I first started learning the legal revolution, I was a bit like, so many acts, so many names, so many dates. But once I actually really started studying, I was fascinated by this. It's crazy how we managed to pass all this. Like, just brace yourself for what you're about to discover or hear. Well, the KPD was a group of one of the first, or the first organization that was taken care of by the Nazis. So they were an obstacle to the Nazi regime because they were growing really fast and they were the main form of opposition towards the Nazis. I mean, NASDAQ was far right, despite what people say, and the KPD was far left. I remember at one video I talked about this. I did like, here's NASDAQ and here's KPD. But yeah. So they, like in the Reichstag, whenever a Nazi party wanted to pass laws, the KPD would always stop this. They'd be like, no. And because the Nazi party was the largest party in the Reichstag, but the KPD was strong enough to stop some of their legislation. So after the Reichstag fire, those who hadn't been arrested yet were in prison, had already fled to exile. So either the communists went into exile, were imprisoned, and arrested and imprisoned. And the KPD party was officially banned on the 6th of March 1933. I think in my other video I said the 8th of March. No, it's the 6th of March of 1933. Then the SPD. Well, the SPD, like I said, were the party who actually stood up in the debate on the Enabling Act and said, no, we don't want to vote for this, it's going to destroy us. They were right. So the SPD were those 94 votes. And not all, I don't think it was all the SPD, but the SPD were those 94 votes against. They were outlawed, as a party, party hostile to the nation and the state. Party hostile to the nation and the state, of course. We now know it was the Nazis who were the hostile and dangerous to the state, but back then, a Nazi government who basically run the state saw this other political party who was quite big was potentially dangerous to them. Maybe not to us as we visualize society now, but back then for the Nazis it was a dangerous political party. And they were officially banned on the 22nd of June 1933, over 3 months after the KPD were banned. Other political parties like the NVP or the CCP. So the NVP were the far right party before the Nazis, and the CCP was a Catholic center party. So the way they opposed and stopped the Nazi regime was basically standing in the way. So, it wasn't that big, but big enough that if enough of them collaborated, they would stop any Nazi legislation. So these parties dissolved themselves. They couldn't participate in the Reichstag anyway, but they could still voice opposition from outside. So the NVP, what they did, instead of dissolving themselves, what they did was join, kind of merge into a Nazi party. So it's not like it was not NASDAQ, the NVP party. It was a Nazi party with the NVP members. And this all happened on the 27th of June 1933, 5 days after the SPD were banned. And the CCP had dissolved themselves over a month earlier, on the 5th of May of 1933. Then other political parties and political opponents, if they disagreed and threatened the Nazi regime, they were sent to concentration camps. Now, I already mentioned this in my police state video, but these concentration camps right now were simply camps like prisons, but for politicians. So it was not the concentration camps we think of now when someone says, "Oh wow, Nazi concentration camps." It's not that. It's political concentration camps, war camps, but for politicians. And these were started in around March 1933. So 2 months after he came to power, not even 2 months. In fall, February, and March, it's still right at the beginning of his chancellorship. Then he finally created, I think it's what was the name? I always forget. I think it's Gleichschaltung. If I may be wrong, I think it's Gleichschaltung. Wait, I think I have it. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Gleichschaltung. They wanted everything to be one of the same. I'm going to go on to Gleichschaltung in a bit, but they basically put everything into the same, basically creating a one-party state. And they did this by passing a law called the Law Against the Establishment of Other Political Parties, which was passed on the 14th of July 1933. So on the 27th of June, DNBP became absorbed by the NASDAQ. The DNBP officially stopped existing. Members of the DNBP went into NASDAQ. And yeah, just a few days, just over 2 weeks later, all new parties were banned. You can create a party. Well, trade unions, they were left wing. Trade unions were socialists. They're not socialists. They were a socialist idea, and they gave ordinary people too much control and power, so they could actually demand stuff from the government. And for the Nazis, that's a big no-no. No, you are not going to demand stuff from us. Well, trade unions were effectively abolished by the 2nd of May 1933, and workers were not at first. First it was optional, but then later on it would be obligatory. They had to join the German Labor Front, or the DAF. I have a video on this, the very first video I ever posted, so if you want to know more about Nazi policies towards the workers, go check it out. But he did this, so now trade unions could not bother him. Left-wing press obviously voiced opposition against Hitler and his actions, and basically anti-Nazi. They were constantly anti-Nazi, which is understandable, And what they did was censorship, especially in 1934. In 1934, all throughout the year, there was a lot of censorship. Again, this was organized by the propaganda ministry, so Goebbels, and yeah, they censored things. Although some newspapers did get through, the So-Paid managed to communicate with people in Germany. If you want to know more about So-Paid and the SPD in exile, go check out my video on the age of Himmler. Well, and state governments. Well, state governments, they could somewhat run independently from the central government, and this has kind of been really highlighted right now with the coronavirus pandemic. Some central governments are like, example here, the Spanish government wants to do some certain restrictions. They want to close the borders between the areas, the provinces, but Madrid's like, no, I don't think we should close our borders. So it's not like they could just disobey, but they could get in the way and stop Nazi ideas from being affected in certain areas. So that's why he had to remove local governments. So Goering ran the Prussian government. Then this was established on the 31st of March 1933, and there was a law passed, the law for the coordination of the federal states, basically forcing all Germany states to join to one, if that makes sense. And this was passed on the 7th of April of 1933. The same day, the law for the restoration of a professional civil service was passed. I'm going to get into that in just a sec. Well, loaner parliaments were abolished, so that's done with. And goal lighters were installed, which reported directly to Berlin. Okay, so people kind of get goal lighters wrong. I did too before I read this book. Highly recommend it. It's called Goebbels. It's by Peter Longerich, and it's basically entirely about Goebbels. But I read that, and then I found out that Goebbels was the goal lighter to Berlin by 1926. And I thought, how could it be the governor basically of Berlin if the Nazi party wasn't even in power by then? Well, goal lighters, as far as I understand, and I think it's the correct definition, were party leaders. So Goebbels was the party leader in Berlin. Goering was the goal lighter of Prussia. He was a party leader in Prussia. So there were goal lighters all around Germany. These goal lighters, they were just party officials reported to Berlin. So by definition, Goebbels was the most. So Goering was the one with the most land and the biggest state. Goebbels was the one with the most power because he was in Berlin, but the Goebbels still reported to Hitler. Well, then when Hitler came to power and he abolished loaner parliaments and state governments, he made these goal lighters like local governments. So goal lighters now did mean a local government figure who reported to Berlin. By Berlin, I mean Hitler, I mean Nazi headquarters, not the goal lighter of Berlin, so Goebbels. Although I think by 1933, Goebbels was no longer the goal lighter of Berlin. He was Minister of Propaganda. He had a separate office. If you want to know more about Goebbels, go check out my video. So goal lighters reported directly to Berlin. So now Berlin was basically the center of German politics. Not only the capital, but everything went to Berlin. I mean, before it kind of was like that, but still. Then the civil service. Well, again, this was an obstacle to the exercise of dictatorial power. The civil service kind of got in the way. They couldn't establish an autocratic regime without the support of the civil service. So what did Hitler do? He passed the law for the restoration of professional civil service on the 7th of April 1933. He also established on the same day the People's Court under the Gestapo. By People's Court, it's like Nazi courts. I already mentioned this in my police state Himmler video. But it's basically it was a People's Court, but it was Nazi court. And it wasn't Gestapo controlled. So again, not that it wasn't a democratic court. It's not like modern day courts. And some judges and some members of the civil service were forced to resign. Then the Catholic Church, well, the way they were a threat to Hitler was because Catholics, their loyalty lies in the Pope, not Hitler. Then later on, when the Hitler myth was being proposed, they did not accept it. But right now, as when Hitler came to power, he knew he couldn't do without the support of the Catholic Church. So he signed the Concord Act on the 20th of July, 1933, my birthday. Well, the Concord Act said if if Nazi party left the church alone, the church wouldn't turn against the Nazi party. And this was signed by Pius XI most of the negotiation was done by future Pius XII. So that was like an agreement with the church, which would later be broken like every single other political agreement Hitler did. But yeah, that was how he handled the Catholic Church in the Revolution. Then other political opponents, well, not only like all the parties, because by this point, this is 1934, by this point there were no other political parties, but other political opponents, both no non-party officials and internal Nazi members could potentially pose a threat to the regime and raise support against Nazi. After all, by 1934, there was still some sort of division in the Nazi Party. There was the right wing with Hitler and the left wing with Strasser. So there was still division. So what did Hitler do? Political assassinations and the land of long knives, which I'm going to get into in a bit. And this was on the 30th of June 1934. Well, I mentioned Gleichschaltung, which is to make everything into the same, the creation of a one-party state, one community, one thing. Gleichschaltung is one thing. The other word that's commonly thrown around, and it's really important if you want to understand the Nazi Party, you need to understand this word, and it's Volksgemeinschaft. Volksgemeinschaft is it's basically to state based on racial community where like Aryan supremacy, and everything Hitler did in the 1930s was towards Volksgemeinschaft. The workers, the women, the young people, the civil service. Everything he did was Volksgemeinschaft, and I'm probably going to do a video on each individual group controlled in Volksgemeinschaft, because doing a video on every group, to get just one video, that would take hours. I'm not kidding, it would be around 12 hours long, at least. Well, then it goes the Night of the Long Knives, 30th of June 1934. Well, it was basically Hitler's way of turning on the SA. So the SA leader was Ernst Röhm. Well, Röhm left the Night of Long Knives was against the SA. The SA was kind of left-wing leaning, and there was an ideology in the left wing called the Second Revolution. So there was a revolution by the higher class, and the lower class would take over. So what happened in Russia in 1917? What essentially happened in Germany in 1918 and 1919. Well, Rome believed in the Second Revolution. Hitler wants to remain in power. Well, by turning on the SA, he also gets power from those who were afraid of the SA. Rome was famously homosexual, and openly he wasn't afraid of it. But they still believed by this point that homosexuality was a disease, and so it would be spread, and Hitler wanted to eradicate homosexuality from the party. Rome, again, he was getting more ambitious. He said, okay, I want to merge the SA with the army, so I have more men and more weapons. Again, threat to the Nazi regime. If, like I said, the SA was kind of left-wing, so if he turned on the left wing, he would get even more support by those who were in the right wing of the Nazi party and the political spectrum. So again, turning on the SA doesn't seem like a bad idea. I mean, the SA was quite a large force, and even after, if they wanted to merge with the army and gain more weapons, the SA were 3 million strong. 3 million. In context, the German army was 100,000. It would take 30 times. The SA was 30 times bigger than the German army. So quite a significant force. Then Hitler did get kind of manipulated into this. Goering kind of made it seem like Rome was planning a coup. And Himmler wanted to break the SS away from the SA. Because originally the SS was part of the SA. Well, I mean, the SA were kind of useful at the beginning of the regime, but by the end, by June 1934, not so much. Hitler was already chancellor. And then, obviously, the SA were loyal to Rome, not to Hitler. So, yeah, then, not long knives happened. People like von Schleicher, SPD members, von Kahr, other Strasser, political opponents, including Rome, were killed. And estimated between 90 to 200 people died. And Hitler, he didn't shy away, but he also didn't say, oh, hey, I killed them. He basically took on responsibility in quite an interesting way. Well, then the last step into transitioning to a full-on dictatorship was the death of the president, Paul von Hindenburg on the 2nd of August 1934. He was made to sign this thing on his deathbed. Like, there were SA members, or SS, or whatever, on his bedside, basically forcing him to sign this a few days before he died. But it said that the first section, that the office of Reich President and Reich Chancellor would merge, creating the position of Führer, which would include the responsibility and political power of both positions. And this Führer would be Adolf Hitler, and he would choose his deputy, which was Hess. And section 2 said that this law would be effective as soon as Hindenburg dies. Hindenburg dies, and this becomes effective, and Hitler is now officially Führer of Germany. So that is the path from dictatorship to from democracy to dictatorship, and it's really crazy how he did it. I just don't know how he did it. It's really impressive, and you have to admit, he was really smart. He really knew what he was doing. They obviously underestimated Hitler's power and his political ability and maneuvering. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to tell you about this. So yeah, that was how a country, a 15-year-old democracy was destroyed in just a year and a bit. Like pressuring, political maneuvering, pressure, like I said, threats, and forcing a poor man dying, like, on his deathbed to saying this. And then there's a whole debate as to if Hitler consolidated his power through mostly legal means. I think he did. He did do it. The only illegal thing he did was the Night of the Long Knives, and the Reichstag fire. But still, it's really impressive how he did this. Like, it's completely legal except the Reichstag fire and the Night of the Long Knives. But it's still really impressive, the whole legal revolution and enabling it. Wow. Anyway, that is pretty much it, and I have nothing else to say. So yeah, thank you for watching.